Sir, we are
Welcome all the distinguished speakers and participants to Responsible AI for Social Empowerment RAISE 2020, a global summit on artificial intelligence organized by the Government of India. As you are aware, this summit was inaugurated by the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, yesterday evening. The summit is having 40 plus sessions on contemporary topics on AI. It has participation of AI experts, domain experts, and practitioners, policymakers, thought leaders, research scholars, startups, and young minds across the globe. Lack of clarity on development and deployment processes and trust issues are seen as major barriers for adoption of AI worldwide, as well as in India. In this session, we delve more around these aspects and explore key concerns and potential models of awareness generation across public sector, private sector, academic institutions, and also for the public at large. With this, I welcome all the distinguished speakers to join the current session, which is on education and awareness for responsible AI. Broadly, this session is organized as follows. At the beginning, we will have a 20 minutes keynote session, followed by a panel discussion for 60 minutes. At the end, we can take up a Q&A session for around 10 to 15 minutes. To take this session forward, we have with us distinguished dignitaries from diverse fields, greatly experienced in this domain. And I would like to introduce Mr. Rahul Sharma, President for Amazon Internet Services Public Sector for India and South Asia, who is the keynote speaker for this session and also one of the panel speakers. Rahul is a strategist, business and change leader, design thinker, cloud enthusiast, and tech evangelist. He is an elected member of the NASSCOM Executive Council and nominated as a governing member of the NASSCOM Sector Skills Council. Ms.Urvashi Aneja is the founding director of Tandem Research. She leads Tandem's future of work and learning and artificial intelligence and society initiatives. Her organization is an interdisciplinary research collective that generates policy insights at the interface of technology, society, and sustainability. She will play the role of moderator during the panel discussion. We have with us Dr. Rahul Panicker, Chief Research and Innovation Officer, Wadhwani Institute for Artificial Intelligence. He heads research on AI at the Institute, which aims to bring AI to the benefit of the next 5 billion across health, education, agriculture, infrastructure, and finance, and exploring questions of ethics and policy in AI. Next is Dr. Rohini Srivathsa, who is the CTO of Microsoft India. Dr. Rohini is responsible for helping Microsoft customers and partners across industry and the government drive innovation and growth through tech intensity in the age of Industry 4.0. She has been recognized among the top 10 most influential analytics leaders in India in 2019 by the Analytics India magazine. And finally, we have Mr. Kai Andersson, a strategist with major impact initiatives at AI Sweden, which is the Swedish National AI Center. Kai's focus is on major impact initiatives with AI Sweden, currently focusing on accelerating applied AI in Swedish healthcare and media and democracy. He's also a delegate of the Swedish AI Council, as well as the Nordic AI Alliance, Innovation Grand Prix winner at Cannes Lions, and has 20 years of experience from international advertising, PR, PA, and digital ad agencies. With this, I invite Mr. Rahul Sharma, President for Amazon Internet Services Public Sector for India and South Asia, to begin the keynote session. Over to Mr. Rahul.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mishra. It's indeed an honor and privilege to be here among such great panelists. The session today is about awareness for responsible AI, and I just want to take everybody a little bit back to talk about what's been happening with machine learning and AI. I mean, machine learning and AI has been around for the last 40, 50 years. And it's only in the last sort of 5, 10 years that we've certainly started to see so much discussion and so much talk about AI. So what's been happening? What's the reason why, although this is something that's been around for the last 40, 50 years, what's causing this propagation of AI significantly across enterprises, across government? And I think if you look at one end, there's been an explosion of data. Everybody talks about the explosion of data through devices, through availability of IoT, and so on and so forth. That's been obviously a very, very key reason for progression of AI and machine learning. But I think there's also another big event that happened about 14 years ago, which was the launch of the public cloud. AWS was the founder of the public cloud, and I think that has brought to bear the significant resources that are now available to all the masses to be able to experiment with AI and machine learning. What used to be resources that were only available to a select few research houses or enterprises about 30, 40 years ago, one of the reasons for the democratized availability of these resources has been cloud. And that's led to a lot of what you're seeing here in terms of propagation of machine learning and AI. I think India is also rapidly shifting toward digital ecosystems in hopes of enabling positive socio-economic change. I think a number of initiatives that the government is going through on digitization is really noteworthy. It's the mission of me and my team, the public sector team for AWS in India and South Asia, that we want to be able to make a positive impact on the life of every citizen of India through AWS. And technology plays obviously a very, very big part of that. I think it's really key as you think about education, as you think about skilling, as you think about healthcare, as you think about livelihood, agriculture. There is a potential to make an impact across all domains that that the government today is working towards. And machine learning and AI have a very significant part to play. At Amazon, we've been going through our own machine learning journey for the last 20 years. We pretty much have machine learning in every aspect, in every function of Amazon. There's not a single business function of Amazon that hasn't been made better through machine learning. But it didn't happen overnight. It took cultural and technological shift to be able to do this. And it takes a lot to be able to learn how to do machine learning and AI successfully. And therefore, when we think about awareness for AI and machine learning, I think I'd like to just talk about the 4 key elements of the deployment of machine learning and AI in the context of AI for all, AI for purpose, or responsible AI. And these are culture, use cases, data, and skills and research. So let me start with culture. I think the most important thing, obviously, is going to be championing a culture of machine learning. When you think about what's the big change between 40 years ago versus now and the availability of cloud, one of the key aspects of cloud is the ability to experiment and the ability to be experiential in going about whatever you're doing. And I think that's where the most important need to scale machine learning and AI comes from. You need to be able to champion a culture of machine learning that is all about applying this in an experimental form. You need to be able to do experiments at the minimal cost. You need to be able to provide resources that you don't have to bring to bear, and the cost of experimentation has to be significantly lower. So I think that culture of innovation that creates this environment of experimentation is going to be really, really important. When you think about why it's important, why experiential and experimental approaches are important to machine learning, you have to think about the fact that there's no 3-year project for machine learning or AI. You have to be able to create outcomes in 6 months to 10 months. And I think that's where the core importance of being able to create something that you can quickly deploy and learn from becomes important. I'll give the example of the India contact tracing app, the fact that they were able to put something together in a matter of less than 2 weeks. And that platform scaled to over 150 million providers very quickly. I think that's the kind of mechanism and that's the kind of culture that is needed to be able to take this forward. I'd like to, for example, talk about one of the examples in agriculture, Cropin. Cropin is a startup that is focused on machine learning and AI in agriculture. And one of the key things that they are able to do is they are able to highlight associated risks and opportunities for all the agri stakeholders. What is the kind of appraisal and disbursement process for the farmer as far as insurance is concerned? What are the factors that come into play when it comes to risk associated with the crop? So Cropin uses Amazon SageMaker to be able to manage their huge machine learning workloads, and they deploy trained models on serverless frameworks using AWS Lambda. And with this, they are able to actually create models very, very quickly. I think that's the key, the ability for us to be able to create an open source models with the right tools, without having to do much work, I think it's going to be really, really important. So when you think about the culture of innovation, it's really, really important to be able to approach this in an iterative manner. And I think that's where the power of cloud can really bring to bear. The second one is going to be around, I think the second perspective is going to be important is around the culture and identification, sorry, the use case and the identification of the right use case, the identification of the right business problem. It's really, really important to focus on what we believe is the outcome that we need to go towards, because there are so many different use cases that are out there. Which are the ones that are relevant for machine learning? That becomes really important. Speed is key, business value is key, and the availability of data on that in the domain is going to be key. And that's where it's really important to be able to bring back an environment which helps focus on the right use cases as well. I'll just give you the example of Formula One. Motorsport was looking for a new way to deliver, a new experience of race metrics, and they had a lot of data. They had 65 years of historical data, and they brought that to bear using machine learning and AI to actually train deep learning models on historical data. And each car is generating, with 120 sensors, each car generates about 3 GB of data, and 1,500 data points every second are generated. So when you have to harness that amount of data, you need to be able to use the right tools and then apply it in the right form. So that's a perfect use case to be able to go for. And I think that's where it's important for responsible AI, for AI with purpose. It's really going to be important to be able to create an environment where the right use cases can be identified. I'll talk about a little bit how important startups are in this entire equation. And the ability for government to be able to work with startups is going to be a really important factor in all of this. AWS started the Chief Minister Challenge, which works with a number of different startups and the state governments to be able to actually identify use cases. And these are the whole idea here is the ability for us to be able to find those use cases which are most important to the government and find and curate startups that can help address these challenges. But the end outcome at the end of the day should not be a one-time grant. It should not be just a one-time award. But really, we should be able to see, can they be given projects and actual live projects to be able to take them forward? And I think that's where it's really important for government to be able to step in and say, look, we want these startups, we want these use cases to be addressed in a unique way. We have a program called AWS GovStart that helps startups to be able to work with government on these metrics. If you think about some of the other mechanisms that are available in India today that are really important, the Smart India Hackathon, it's one of the world's biggest open innovation model that's focused on rewarding innovative solutions that's provided by students. And there are problem statements submitted to the ministries, industries, NGOs. And from 2017 onwards, the SIH has been having participation of over 1 million students from 7,000 plus institutions. And more than 5,000 solutions have actually been selected for various organization, ministries, government departments, and for incubation. That plus all the great work that the NEGD and MeitY have been doing on curation of startups for Atmanirbhar Bharat, I think, are really key initiatives for us to be able to identify the right use cases to be able to take this forward. So the use case, the ability to bring in startups, I think, becomes a really important part of finding the right business problem. The third perspective here is all about data. And when it comes to machine learning, data is often cited as the number one challenge. In our experience with customers, more than half of the time that they actually spend building the machine learning models can be spent on data wrangling and data cleanup and pre-processing of data. And I think that's where it's really important when you think about the need to be able to have AI for impact or AI for purpose or responsible AI. I think we need to be able to think about open data models. That's where I think the availability of open data that becomes available to a number of machine learning applications becomes really important. When I think about the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, they had a really excellent initiative on open data called the Indian Urban Observatory, where they are pulling in data from over 100 cities into the Urban Observatory. And that data is available to startups, for other use cases, for many different applications. I'll also like to give another example of SatSure. SatSure is a startup that has been working with government of Telangana as an example to provide space-based decision intelligence for effective agriculture risk monitoring. SatSure actually uses Earth on AWS, which helps build planetary scale applications in the cloud using open geospatial data on the registry of open data. The registry of open data on AWS actually has a lot of data that helps you discover and share data sets that are available, across the world. So you can find data sets from many different domains here, and we've helped it easy to make explore data sets, and they are suitable for multiple use cases. We in fact have one of the use cases is from Janagraha, which is all about citizen services and citizen complaints. So I think one of the most important things to be able to progress awareness for AI is going to be around availability of open data, and how can we actually use open data to machine learning ready open data. So if there is a way that we can all come together to be able to create petabytes of open data that is machine learning ready, there's a number of good initiatives. The Ministry of IT also has the Open Data Initiative, and AWS Registry of Open Data is also available. And I think that can really help us progress the use cases for AI and machine learning really, really well. I think the final thing that I want to talk about is around research and skilling. I think that is a really important element to really spreading the awareness and making a groundswell for AI and ML, really come forward. When you think about research institutions, I think it's really important to be able to bring in research institutions into the picture. And there's a lot of work that is happening with the IITs. There's a lot of work that's happening with CDAC and a number of research institutions in India. We've worked with institutes like IIT Varanasi. We created an AI and machine learning center of excellence in IIT Varanasi. We actually have been working with IIT Kharagpur on their AI initiative. And I think these are the kind of initiatives that will really help bring in the research element. AWS Educate is also a global program which helps in bringing through the power of the AWS platform in an experiential manner to students. The same technology that is available to the largest companies in the world is made available to students. We also give them pre-paid credits. We give them learning paths. And these are actually available to tens of thousands of students in India today. Very recently, we integrated curriculum into education institutions. So we've been actually integrating deep technology curriculum in mainstream college education. And I think that's going to be really important to be able to progress the awareness of AI. Then in the case of AWS Educate, we actually have brought together 7 different institutions where their curriculum was actually integrated using AWS cloud curriculum. And they are able to the students are able to experience AI and ML use cases as they're going through their learning. I think that becomes really important as well. When you think about skills, there's so much happening around skills, and I think that's the key area of focus for us as well. The ability for us to be able to impact through digital literacy the masses in India, and that's the only way India will be able to take a technology generation leap on AI and ML, which is really possible. I'd like to point to one really key initiative that the Ministry of IT has been running, which is the Common Service Centers. Common Service Centers, we have over 400,000, nearly 450,000 Common Service Centers across India. And they have a number of different initiatives that they've been working for, able to propagate skilling. So Common Service Centers actually work with AWS Educate to be able to bring machine learning, AI, learning paths, and courseware and the platform to so many students to parts of rural India. They've also been working as a part of PMG Disha to be able to deliver literacy to 60 million citizens of India. And they use AWS to be able to actually bring that fairly quickly. I think the ability for a scalable model like the Common Service Centers become a very invaluable tool to be able to take a lot of this propagation forward, and to be able to create the groundswell needed for machine learning and AI to really come up in India. And I'll give one challenge. I think one of the things, for an example, that we can do is, how about we train schoolgirls that have access, in rural India or in third tier, towns or second tier towns in India, on data annotation. And we can provide them with tools to be able to annotate the data, that the petabytes of data that is needed in India, that is machine learning ready. Somebody needs to annotate that data. Why don't we give that across to girls in schools? And gives them a little bit livelihood, gives them a reason to also continue being educated in school. And this is a way that we can actually create a groundswell of both awareness as well as understanding of machine learning and AI. When you think about skills, I think school education and K to 12 education is also really important to be able to create that spread of knowledge. And I have to call out the work that has been done by the ATL Atal Tinkering Lab as a part of Atal Innovation Mission. NITI Aayog had collaborated with NASSCOM to launch the ATL AI Step Up module. A number of industry partners came together, and AWS was involved there as well, where we launched the ATL AI Step Up module for students on the eve of India's Independence Day in order to drive AI education and innovation to the next level in schools across the country. And this is where I think that ability to really create that awareness at the school level it becomes really important. When you think about this initiative that is expected to reach 5,000 schools and 2.5 million students in the K-12 space, this becomes really important mechanism to be able to take it forward. When you think about even initiatives such as the Future of Skills, I know Dr. Mishra has been very closely associated with Future of Skills. I think that's a great initiative where now, with the launch of Future Skills to Future Skills Prime, I think is going to be a very, very important factor in skilling the couple of million people in new technology skills. With this awareness and understanding of what the possibilities of AI and ML are, with the right skills being penetrated, with the right data being available, with the right culture being created around machine learning and AI, I think that's what will take for us to really take this to the next level. And we shouldn't have to take a step jump, but we can actually take not just an incremental or step jump in using these technologies, but we can actually take this to a completely new level. So I hope I hope you enjoy the session. I hope you enjoy the entire sort of event. It's a real privilege and pleasure to be associated with this, and I hope you have a good time. Thank you so much. I'll hand it back to the moderator.
Thank you, Rahul, for sharing such insightful thoughts on the subject over this platform. And the three key themes which are related to this theme of education and awareness for responsible AI. We also highlighted the need for sustained startup collaboration with the government using AI for ushering in innovation, especially for the Atmanirbhar Bharat concept, and the need for deeper research in this domain. I'm sure the participants and viewer would have found your sharing of use cases and practical examples from the states and the grassroots, including the PMJ Disha scheme that you mentioned for digital literacy, the Common Service Centers scheme for delivery of services, and the future skills, very interesting and relevant. Thank you very much. Next, I invite Ms.Urvashi Aneja, Founding Director, Tandem Research, to take over as the moderator for our next panel session. Over to you, Urvashi. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mishra. I'm delighted to be here and to be moderating this session on education and awareness for responsible AI. I mean, I think we can all agree that AI is reshaping how we live, how we work, how we socialize, how we do medicine, how we do manufacturing. So the changes are staggering, and a lot of the transformation that we expect to see is beneficial, but there could also be some harmful applications of AI. So the question before us today is, how do we facilitate responsible AI adoption, and what role does education and awareness have in enabling a responsible AI ecosystem? I think the challenge is particularly acute because many of the ways in which AI is transforming our lives is often invisible to consumers, to broader public. So there is the challenge of how do we make these systems visible and comprehensible for policymakers, for consumers, to be able to create this responsible AI ecosystem. So we have an excellent panel here to share their thoughts with us. So without further ado, may I call on Dr. Rohini Srivathsa first to share her insights on translating some of the principles for responsible AI across different societal contexts, across different industries, and across different stakeholders. Dr. Rohini, over to you.
Thank you, Urvashi. Um, um, I'd like to share some thoughts about and really piggyback on Rahul's earlier points about the potential of AI. Clearly, there is tremendous potential from an economic perspective and social perspective across sectors, and most of this entire conference is speaking about the ability to use AI for inclusive India. But to Urvashi's point, yes, there are also issues that one needs to think about, and that is what I'd like to draw attention towards. Because I think there is a real thought here, and if you look at the entire journey of artificial intelligence, there is a question that we need to think about today as to why, and why responsibility. And the big thought here is that the tool that we are creating today and the kind of benefit is so great, and the innovation is so quick, that one needs to tread carefully and make sure that that the right thinking and the right practices are put in place. And that's what my comments are going to be about. So what exactly is happening in the world of AI? If you look at the pace of advancement of innovation just in the last few years, and if you look at, whether it's vision or speech recognition or translation, and the years down that you have on the slide underneath are the years where these capabilities have reached human parity. What that means is that in a narrow AI sense, not as a general purpose AI, but in a narrow AI sense, the machine is able to do just as well as a human being is able to. And that is quite different in terms of innovation from other technologies that we have seen in the technology cycle, and does cause one to think about that as AI gets more and more ambient and more pervasive and hidden in many ways, as Urvashi was saying, you don't know you're using AI, but you are. When you are, for example, looking at a map to figure out how to go from one place to another, or you're looking at a recommendation engine in terms of say, what next you want to buy. There is AI playing behind it. So the question that becomes is that as computers are behaving more like humans, what is the impact on real people? Right, and that is the thought I would like to take you down on. And as an organization which is a technology company and has been in the innovation business for many years, we kind of had this sense almost 4 years ago that we need to really step back and think about the implications of these technologies. So in a way, our progression over the last 4 years has been from going from principles to practice. And that's what I would like to spend some time on, as to how have we thought about, and clearly we are also learning. This is all very new area and we are learning along the way. But almost 4 years ago is when Satya talked about the fact that there needs to be a certain set of principles, and that came out in a book, set of 6 principles for responsible AI, and I'll talk about them. But then over the 4 years, we've really taken it down a path to say, what will it take to scale and put these principles into practice at scale, both in the company, but as well as working with the ecosystem, because this is not just one organization, one party that needs to work on it. This is actually a very societal issue. It's a very government, it's a societal, it's actually international issue, and you will see that as I speak to my comments here. So we started with a set of 6 principles, and in many ways, these principles have stood us well over the last several years and have become stronger in the sense of as we apply them to AI use cases around the world and think about issues of fairness, of transparency, accountability, safety, and really put these principles as a mirror. It has helped us think about, what are the checks and balances, what are the guidelines, what are the tools and techniques we need to put in place to ensure that we are following these principles. And it has helped us be I would say, rigorous in terms of our thinking about this subject. But really, it goes from principles to practice, as I've mentioned. And Where we are in this journey is over a period of time, we've taken them to form the right kind of standards and committees. So one of the things we have is in the organization something called an Ether committee, which is about AI ethics and in engineering and research. Now, this works across different aspects of AI that could be on fairness, human AI collaboration, safety, reliability. There is a group that works on sensitive uses of AI to think about, how these, for example, GPT-3, which is a natural language generation tool, where it could, what could happen, and how one has to think about corner cases. And this is also an area which works as an advisory body to the senior leadership team. Satya's leadership team, to say, as an organization, are we thinking about these issues right? And there's a very strong focus from Microsoft Research that works in all of these areas. Then we've gone forward and created what we have a responsible AI standard for the company. And this standard is now being adopted across the organization in our engineering practices, in our sales and marketing, in the way we engage with our partners, and is becoming the method by which we are taking this responsible AI principles to work across the organization. And the size of Microsoft and scale and the reach, as well as the kind of partners we work with. It is that ability to think at scale on a topic which is actually very, very nebulous and very nuanced in many ways, if you've thought about these topics. Then we are working with our customers and partners, whether it is helping them think about how we are implementing responsible AI in the organization and what might be their approach in terms of an ethics officer or an ethics committee, and what might be the governance approaches, because there's no one approach that works for every organization, every government, and therefore people need to think about what is the right thing in their context. But our ability to share Microsoft's learning along this place is what we take with the customers and partners. Finally, at the end of the day, to be able to apply machine learning and AI at scale, and to be able to say that you are doing it in a responsible manner, means that you also have tools and techniques that can be applied at scale. Okay, which means tools and techniques to think about security, privacy, fairness, hidden bias inside data, interpretability. All of these now are very active areas of research, and I will talk about where they are being put out there for developers to use, because we want these out there so developers can use these tools and resources to check for in their AI systems on responsible AI issues. And this is a very, very active area of research, as I said. So tons of these are out there. Going forward on this journey on how we've been thinking about principles to practice. Again, this is not a one company or one organization or even a one country issue. World Economic Forum has a pretty strong body in this space, and in fact, Brad Smith is speaking later in this event, and Brad Smith is in fact co-chairing this with Kai-Fu Lee, and one big part of this is talking about governance issues in AI at a global level. We've been pretty active globally on things like facial recognition as a technology, and being, sparking that conversation, and whether this needs to be regulated. What does it mean as it being used across different use cases? In India, in fact, a couple of weeks back, MeitY has a working document out there on ethics framework for India. And we've been working to contribute with our expertise and our experience in this space to share in terms of shaping this thinking for India as well. And finally, again, this is not something that a few people, data scientists sitting in one corner, have to think about. This is a broad issue that every part of the society and particularly executives need to think about in terms of their own awareness. What that means is that you need to have the assets that allow people in business, in government, in education to understand what responsible AI, what ethics in AI and thinking about AI as a culture, and thinking about leading that journey with confidence. And I was mentioning earlier that the kind of resources, tools, and techniques that we are creating are also out there on GitHub, and the resources are out there to help people to adopt them. So there is a long journey, and I had to cover that in a pretty short period of time. But I did want to ensure that it comes out that at the end of the day, the question is what computers should do, not what they can do. And really that is the approach that we are taking in terms of thinking about this and thinking about this at scale, and really developing a maturity curve to traverse this journey. Back to you, Urvashi.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Srivathsa. I really appreciate the emphasis you placed on both developing the principles and the leadership that Microsoft is taking in developing these principles, as well as the challenges in translating some of these principles to practice, right? And I think particularly your last slide is something that I hope we can all, that can all stay with us as we leave Raise 2020, right? That it's not about what they can do, but what we should do, so that society has a really crucial role to play in shaping technology trajectories, and policy has a really crucial role to ensure that technology trajectories are aligned with the kind of values we hold dear as a society, right? So I think what is really important about your presentation is that it really challenges this idea of technological determinism, that there is only one kind of trajectory that technology is going to follow, and we are all here for, and we have to carry on, we have to go with the ride. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. And we'll come back to you for a few follow-up questions after we get inputs from the other speakers as well. Rahul, perhaps I can bring you in here. I know you've been thinking a lot about the kind of rules, tools, and norms that are needed for responsible AI, and the ways in which governments, industry, and civil society can come together towards developing some of those. So Rahul, over to you for your opening remarks.
Sure, thanks, Urvashi. And thanks, Rahul and Rohini, for those great opening remarks that sets the stage. And in fact, I broadly wanted to touch upon maybe two aspects of what it takes to do responsible AI, right? Which is any behavior change. There's a large body of literature here that any sustained behavior change needs rules, tools, and norms, and I'll explain what that means. And as we are already in an age of AI where AI solutions are getting deployed, how do we evaluate these? How do we assess these for responsible deployment? We'll maybe use a couple slides. A second. I hope the slides are visible. Right. Yeah. So yeah, rules, tools, and norms. So if we go back to seatbelts in cars, right? It's taken decades to require people to take care of their own safety in the form of wearing seatbelts, and it actually took all three of these. It required there to be laws requiring that people wear seatbelts. It required cars having seatbelts. I don't know how many of you remember are old enough here to have been in cars that did not have seatbelts. At least I as a kid did ride in cars maybe even 25 years ago that did not have seatbelts. And finally, you need the norm of wearing. There has to be a social pressure to wear seatbelts. And this is something that I should say I experienced more in the West than in India, where not wearing seatbelt while also being illegal is highly frowned upon in a peer group. And the same model applies across many forms of behavior change, whether it's actually cessation of smoking, avoiding speeding, and so on. And this is something that we can draw on even for practice of AI ethics. And Rohini gave some great examples of how Microsoft is doing this internally. And so if we look at how this applies to AI, certainly you need rules. So for example, what outside of individual organizations as a society, right? What constitutes responsible AI, right? Are there clear legal definitions? Many professions have continuing education requirements. Are there training requirements for developers and consumers of AI that are mandated depending on application? The way AI applications are regulated, I mean, my opinion is that this has to be application specific. You the way a healthcare technology, in a diagnosis algorithm that uses AI is regulated has to be very different from a content recommendation algorithm, which may not even have to be regulated. Right? What sort of redressal mechanisms do you build in? So in a situation where, for example, someone's actually getting denied someone's getting denied credit, for example, in a banking system. So there's a large body of rules that have to be created, and defining where rules apply and where they don't. And for these, again, you need tools, right? So you need tools to assess fairness, accountability, transparency, and so on. Right? And there's a lot, again, that can be drawn on from fields that healthcare has a lot to offer here. For example, in healthcare, we have good medical practice. There's actually guidelines that can be established around what are good ML practices. Tools also require easy training, access to training materials, courses for students. Ethics training is not required as an engineering graduate in India, for example. There are countries that actually require that, right? Medicine requires ethics training. Engineering does not. Right? But in a world that runs on technology, how can we allow the people who create that technology to not have any ethics training? Right? And in the absence of that, far too often, the adverse consequences that we see of technology are not, more often than not, are not because of malicious intent, but because of plain naivety. Right? And finally, the notion of norm is basically social pressure. Without something becoming a norm, the only way these things can be enforced is through policing. Right? It's it's establishment of norms that allow something to become cultural, and that allow practice becomes embedded in psyches and organizations. Right? And then maybe the second thing I'll touch upon outside of rules, tools, and norms is, so as we look at deploying AI solutions, how do we evaluate them, right? What burdens do we place in evaluating these? And again, this is one where the current wisdom is that we should look at this as a 4-phase evaluation. Right? The first one will be familiar to most people in the research community, which is you evaluate algorithms on a test set. Right? But that's not enough, right? In any real world application, what's recommended is a 4-phase approach, which is beyond a test set, you go to control pilots. Test set ensures, are you getting performance? Are you actually working safely, right? Now, if used correctly, right, is it that is a control pilot. If used correctly, is it providing benefit and not doing harm? You go to uncontrolled pilots, which is in the real world, will it be used in the way that you expect it to be used, right? And far too often, that's not the case. And we have famous examples of these things failing. Amazon has been a pioneer in lots of AI solutions, and therefore also has had to learn the hard way. And one famous example is where Alexa devices were triggered by a TV message, and lots of online orders happened through Alexa in the early days, right? Maybe 3 years ago or so. So these sort of things happen, and you only discover those through these uncontrolled pilots. But if everyone here were to take away one thing from everything I've said, it's this last one, that none of these can be done perfectly, but what protects you is robust post-deployment monitoring, because it is impossible to anticipate all the corner cases, all the ways in which technology fails. So you have to have feedback loops, and any responsible technologist has to insist on post-deployment monitoring and make sure that the consequences, they take responsibility for the consequences of their creation. I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thanks, Rahul. Lots and lots of food for thought, and leaves me with many questions, which I'll come back to. But I think to two points that really stand out for me is maybe something that you said at the end as well, right? That none of this can be done perfectly. It's not a magic wand. It's not a silver bullet. Like many other technologies, it will fail. Like my laptop gets hung every other day or whatever else, right? That failure is part of it. And we need to create those mechanisms and understanding that recognize that failure is real, right? So I think that's really important. And that question of post-deployment monitoring is key. Obviously, I think it raises the question of who does it, right? And what is our benchmark for acceptability? What are we willing to accept? What is the failure rate we are willing to accept before we roll things out to market? I think the other really interesting point that you raised was around the seatbelt analogy, right? And it made me think that that's a really good example also of the role of norms, but also a good example of the questions of power, right? And how power influence how rules and tools and norms actually shape. So I think that, we have great seatbelt for cars, but do we have enough safety mechanisms for for motorcycles, right? Or why don't we have seatbelts in auto rickshaws, right? And what does that tell us about the importance of power in shaping some of these rules, tools, and norms? So we'll come back to that in the discussion. Kai, so perhaps I can bring you in here now to talk about, to talk about what you think is responsible AI and what we need to be doing to facilitate responsible adoption of AI.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on this panel. It's a great chance for me to learn and gain new perspectives. So I represent the Swedish National AI Center, and just through these first minutes, I reflected on that these are so very, very interesting times. I think they're very challenging times for many of us, but as they say, nothing good comes without challenge. We see two representatives from two of the largest tech giants in the world talking about policy and responsibility with more clarity than I would say many governments around the world. I think that's a sign that things require change in order for us to really move into the future, everyone together. And it's the first time also we see the same people in professions going through a second technological shift within their career. I mean, many of us went through the challenges of internet, and yet we still see some of the same reactions and challenges as 20 years ago. Some of them are that many in power disregard the shift as a technical topic or a research challenge, not a societal challenge. We fail to address the larger questions and implications. And this time, as been said on this panel, the implications are many times larger than when the internet came along, and it will happen a lot faster. I think there's going to be a lot more cross-sector collaboration needed between government and the private sector and academia, but also between companies and countries. And also speed is essential. We have strongly rooted traditions in going off in research projects and discussion groups for years to come up with solutions, but the companies and private sectors don't wait for that. So regulations are really lagging behind. And a second point, I think I've seen greatness all over the world, countries being really good at taking on different challenges, but I have yet to see one country being great at everything. And first of all, I think my role in this panel is to learn from you, and secondly, maybe add some perspectives from Sweden, but also from the European Union. So I will just share a few slides to talk about our perspective. The mission statement of the National AI Center Sweden, AI Sweden, is to accelerate the use of AI for the benefit of our society, our competitiveness, and for everyone living in Sweden. And everyone living in Sweden also includes future generations. So what we have is, we are the National Center for Applied AI. We act as a neutral, non-profit, but broadly funded entity. And we're here to help AI help every organization and entity in Sweden, both individuals and groups and organizations. We have partners from academia, all the universities, many companies in Sweden, and also the public sector. And this is a very, very important part because the challenges are cross-industry and the solutions are cross-industry. Many times the data required to solve a problem lies with many different parties. And the solution to an ethical or responsible problem lies in collaboration. We focus on 5 different areas. One is strategic partner programs where we help both startups but also executives from the large incumbents, the large companies of Europe and Sweden to really change. We have training and education on a broad societal level for everyone, but also tailored for public sector and private sector so we can re-skill workers and so they can learn what AI means for their current profession. We offer network and a safe space for expertise and experience sharing. It can be very hard for large organizations to feel safe legally to meet and start collaborating because there's really not regulations and law in place for how to handle intellectual property and data sharing for all these new use cases. So we try to provide that safe space. And then we are setting up and quite far along now with the data factory to be able to share and donate data for collaboration projects. And the last part is collaboration projects where our partners identify common goals or challenges where they come together and work together and either donate money or resources to solve problems together that both all the partners but also all of Sweden can benefit from, including our international partners. And we aim to reach our goals to benefit everyone in Sweden and ultimately the world, to try to achieve excellence within all our projects together. But I think most important is to foster collaboration. I mean, we're just too small. We're a very, very small city in India. We're 10 million people. We need to collaborate in order to get anywhere. Change leadership, but also create a new type of leadership that focuses on change and long-term thinking, as opposed to maintaining power and repeating the mantra that we are best. And obviously create a network beyond Sweden. And I wanted to throw in, I don't know, a flame torch or some kind of angle into the area of responsible AI, the topic. In Europe, the topic is often called ethical AI. I do believe that this is incredibly important. However, I think there is a problem that we've heard now AWS and Microsoft representatives talk about it in a very applicable and contextual setting where I think it makes sense. But very often when we hear talk about this in a very academic or theoretical perspective without actually explaining the use case, and then it often becomes an excuse to act, or even worse, from a from a perspective of protecting power or institutions. And then what happens if you don't move ahead? Because as I said before, companies will move ahead. Technology doesn't wait. And I believe that the solutions and the positive solutions for coming generation must be the driving force. I work a lot, or my main focus now is to accelerate applied AI in Swedish healthcare, and our doctors that we work with have the main question that they have top of mind is, would it be responsible not to use AI if children are currently dying in healthcare? We cannot wait more years. The regulators will have to keep up. And I think that's very liberating because they are doctors and they are maybe one of the few professions that have the freedom to say that, because it's unquestioned that their primary job is to save lives. So that is my introduction. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Sky. And thanks for ending with that very provocative statement. I'm sure that raises many questions for everyone. I think two things that really struck with me from your presentation. One was perhaps your opening remarks, right? That where you pointed out that the representatives of two of the technology giants on this panel speak with a lot more clarity on policy issues than we hear governments. And that's both encouraging, but I think also points to a critical problem, right? Where technology is far outpacing policy and far outpacing regulation. And I think as Dr. Rohini started her presentation with, right, how do we align the speed of both those trajectories? That's very critical. And I also wonder, listening to your presentation, whether in some sense, what the differences are between the Indian and Swedish context. I mean, of course, there's a lot of differences, but in some sense, Sweden being much further ahead in having some of the analog components of the digital economy in place compared to India, and what impact that has and how we think about not just responsible AI, but also inclusive AI. So thank you very much for that. So now we'll have a couple of rounds of questions with the panelists, and there have been a few questions that have been coming in from the audience as well, and so we'll try and take as many of those as possible. We do have a good amount of time, so hopefully we won't need to skip any questions or cut any panelists short. So Rohini, if I may start with you. I think a critical point that came out in your presentation was the need for these principles, right? And you outlined the 6 principles that Microsoft is working with. And I wanted to hear a little bit about the difficulty in translating some of these principles to different social contexts, right? Where regulatory capacities might be different or socio-cultural contexts might be different. So how does that interaction reshape how we think of some of these principles? And what comes to mind for me, for an example, is the principle around fairness, right? I think often the principle of fairness in technology circles is sometimes framed as a technical principle, but I think fairness is also very much a social quality, right? So what seems fair to you and me sitting in our particular context might be very different from what seems fair for Kai in his particular social context. So how do we adapt these very high level principles to meet the needs of diverse social groups in diverse contexts?
That's a very, I would say, a nuanced and important question. Because the and that's the reason why this topic is one for me very, very interesting, because it's got so many different colors to it, right? As you rightly pointed out. In fact, just to be clear, we use the word, Microsoft, we in fact have stayed away from calling it ethics, because to us ethics is a term that has a very strong cultural context to it, has a very strong tie-in with the society's values and culture and history and everything. So for us, even that terminology is something that we've stayed away from, and really staying with technology and the role that we play as a technology player and our responsibility in that. So having said that, I think the way the principles are meant to be a set of a framework to really think about issues that a particular AI use case needs to be looked at from that lens, as a mirror. So let's say you're going with a chat bot for, let's say a teenage school or some hostel or something, right? Are there issues need to think about there, right? In terms of any of these principles, whether it's accountability, whether it is a human in the loop, what kind of checks and balances you need to put in. So the lens we take, right, in terms of bringing these principles as into the context of a particular use case, is to say that every society, every country, every organization is living in the context of the regulatory regime of that country. So that comes first, right? Nowhere can these principles sort of come and say that so the context of a society's regulatory regime is the first point that one needs to address. Then beyond that, these are meant to be not directives, they are meant to be guiding principles, and therefore the word principle is very important. They, they need to be guiding principles to think about and pause and think about that. As you are even envisaging an AI product, as you are designing and developing, and as Rahul was pointing out, as you are deploying it, how are you making sure that these principles are being adhered to? And what I mean by adhere to, I mean that where are the checks and balances you're putting in place? Because it is not a black and white. It is a gray, and you have to be in that mode of being continuously monitoring your AI systems, whether it is for accountability, whether it is for fairness. So, for example, fairness, you said, right? Now, if you can think about fairness, is it about gender equality? Is it about fairness across a social spectrum? It's not an easy question, but it is meant to be a principle that if I'm, for example, deploying something for loan disbursement, am I consciously thinking about the fact that in my customer base, am I being fair in the way my AI product is going to be deployed? So it is not a directive. It's meant to be a principle to help you make decisions as AI producers, consumers, and across the spectrum of stakeholders.
Thanks for that. I mean, I think that also points to the importance of bringing in the perspective of the consumers, bringing in the perspective of the supposed beneficiaries of some of these technologies into the design and deployment, right? So that fairness can be can speak directly to their experiences, right? So Rahul, we have two Rahuls on this panel. So Rahul from Wadhwani, maybe I can bring you in here. Rahul, so a lot of the work that you do is particularly focused on addressing some of the needs faced by low-income groups or low-income settings, right? So helping farmers and agriculture, or even refugee contexts in Syria, etc. So my question is that how do we then place these groups at the center of technological change, right? How do we build awareness amongst these groups about the ways in which AI works, the benefits and the challenges, and what do they need to understand better? And is it actually feasible? I think very often we say that we want to include the consumers, include the beneficiaries in these kind of decision making, but is that actually feasible? And if so, what are the ways that we can include them?
I think there are in your question, Urvashi, there's two big pieces I see. One is how do we include beneficiaries in the design process, and secondly, how do we what mechanisms can be there to ensure that the beneficiaries themselves have some ability to assess if they're being treated fairly, for example, right? How can they claim their rights in some way, right? And I think the approach to both have to be different. For the first one, which is inclusive design, again, there's a large body of work there that comes from the world of design, right? How do you design for someone different from yourself, someone different from the designer, right? And the best known techniques out there draw from co-design, which is you involve the beneficiary in the design process, you co-design, right? And then you sort of iteratively go for scale. And in fact, in many cases, when you do co-design, you know what? It's hard to do at scale, right? So customization becomes important, right? And trade-offs become important as you extend. One should not expect that what works in India will automatically work in Kenya, for example, right? Or even what works in Mumbai, right? In the slums of Mumbai, will work in Gorakhpur, let's say, right? The approach has to take that co-design, has to involve co-design, and there's many tools we can draw from. Those tools are typically deployed, let's say, when you design, for example, when you design for the handicapped. In toy design, designers design for people very different from themselves when they design for children, right? So there's a large body of work that can be drawn from, and that actually technologists do, good designers do draw from. But the second question, which is how do we, how does one ensure that the beneficiaries of the technologies are aware of possibilities and have some ability to protect themselves? That's a trickier one. And I say that's a trickier one because that's not even something that, most of us are able to. For example, if we suffer from an illness and we need to seek advanced treatment, well, we seek treatment from the medical system, right? And we place our trust in the expertise in the system. We are not in a position to necessarily train ourselves on all the medical expertise that the system has. So what is it that protects us there, right? In good systems, it's actually regulatory checks and balances. It's the processes established that actually protects the citizen. And I would argue it's the same that has to be done for low-income groups, low-income citizens who need to benefit from these technologies. There need to be regulatory checks and balances. The state has to put in mechanisms by which quality of service is assured to them.
And do you think some of those regulatory checks and balances are in place, and are they adequate? And would you have any suggestions for what some of these regulatory interventions might be?
Well, yeah, I mean, are they adequate? Certainly with a technology as new as AI, no, they're not, right? But I'll say that given how early the technology itself is, we're still in that phase where wide-scale deployment for social interventions is yet to happen, and therefore the opportunity still exists, right? But those checks and balances have to include, for example, let's say for public benefit, one is rolling out, let's say in a public health system, let's say one is rolling out an AI-based solution. Is the public health is the public health system itself equipped to assess quality of AI systems? What expertise exists internally, right? And it's not a one-off evaluation, right? One needs continuous monitoring and evaluation, right? So it requires building our expertise. It requires governance systems. It requires regulatory bodies. Again, there's lots that can be drawn from other regimes, right? We have the automobile sector that has clear regulations. We have healthcare that has clear regulations, right? There's many domains where this is possible, where this can be drawn from. And in fact, if you look at the frontiers of thinking around appropriate mechanisms, it draws heavily from thinking in healthcare, which I think is appropriate. So the short version of it is, no, we're not there yet, but there is a large body of work that can be drawn from, and it requires concerted effort to actually put these systems in place, and it requires building new capabilities in public organizations.
Thanks, Rahul. I think that also reinforces the point that Kai had made when he opened with his remarks, right? Again, about the tech leaders being way ahead of government and thinking about some of these policy matters. Rahul, maybe I can bring you in here, the AWS, Rahul. And what in your view is the importance of skilling and digital literacy at the grassroots level in thinking about or in helping promote AI for social good or beneficial purposes? Is there a role to be played there, and what kind of skilling and literacy is needed? I know you touched upon some of this, but if you could elaborate on it, if you could elaborate on some of the points you mentioned in your opening remarks.
Sure, no, absolutely, Urvashi. I think it's really important for us to be able to think of skills needed in India for AI and machine learning. As if you think about it as a pyramid of skills, at the top of the pyramid is the deep skills that is needed. The Future of Skills program that has been launched by NASSCOM aims to address a couple of million people to be trained on new technologies, and those are deep technologies for machine learning, IoT, AR, VR, and so on and so forth. And that's just one part of the entire skilling pyramid, which is more deeper skills. But as you go down the pyramid, I think at the bottom of the pyramid, digital literacy becomes really, really important. If the person, all of the work that needs to happen around machine learning or AI, it has to be able to touch human lives. People should be able to use them. And I think that's where this interaction, and Rahul Panicker also talked about the fact that, when you have to create this core design process, people have to be comfortable with technology. So it starts with the entire concept of digital literacy and people being comfortable to use technology around them. I think that's where scalable mechanisms need to be put in place, where you could create what I call the groundswell of skills to be able to deal with this, and not just deal with it, but able to take a generation leap on using technology. So when you think about just the example of PMG Disha and digital literacy, you can start with, for example, why can't you have if you think about an electrician could be used to, can be trained to be able to go to your house and configure an Alexa device, as an example. And my mother is a great user of Alexa. She swears by it. And she still struggles with a mobile phone quite a lot, but she's so used to Alexa. And that's when you think about the power of how you actually interact with technology. That's changing. It's really coming on, on its head right now. Gone are the times of the past where you had to deal with a computer, or you had to deal with an actual computer or a phone or a type. This is where the paradigm shift needs to happen, and people have to be comfortable to be able to use this technology. Alexa, we've actually launched Hindi as an example, as a language. And that's where I think the power to be able to use this becomes really important. When you think about on the ground, I also talked about the fact that what precludes a person who's living in a second-tier town or a village to be able to actually learn new technology if they have the wherewithal. And that's where programs are needed to be able to find appropriate skills for them. I think today, one important factor that we have to consider as we move forward with this, and you think about the entire process of thinking of a solution for people, the concept of being hyper-local on solutions needs to be there. Rahul Panicker also talked about it. What works in Mumbai may not work in another area, in Azamgarh as an example. So why can't we think about hyper-local use cases and the ability for us to have interventions that are more hyper-local with core design in those places? And that's where I think the importance of people at that level to be really comfortable using technology comes in, and they can take that gradual step and jump. But in the middle tier also of the skilling pyramid is the broad and pervasive arts discipline, for that matter. How can we actually make technology to be more pervasive, not just in engineering, but in arts, in sciences? And that's where I think the entire India can actually show the way to the rest of the world on how successfully you can integrate these paradigms and these mechanisms overall into multiple streams to be more inclusive. So when you think about the skills pyramid, a lot of work being done at the top of the pyramid when it comes to deep technology. I think a lot more focus is coming in with MeitY, with NITI Aayog, with common service centers at the bottom of the pyramid. I think there's more work to be done at the middle tier of the pyramid, and I think that's where truly you can take this to the next level. So overall, when you think about skills, the ability for you to have micro skills, I think that's where the world is moving to. The ability for you to create micro skills and be constantly trained and retained as you go forward. And with the availability of the tools that we have at our disposal, with the availability of the entire ecosystem that we have, I think that's where we need to be able to move to. We shouldn't have to think about skills as something that remains for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. I think why not look at skills as something that remains relevant for 6 months to a year? And then constantly look at ways to be able to create an environment where people across all spectrums of inclusion can be trained and retrained to be able to be micro-skilled and move forward. And I'll just give you the example of students. This is something that is really close to my heart. Today we have that in every other stream of business or segment of business, you have the tools available using machine learning and AI to be able to personalize your experience, whether you're in travel, whether in retail, whether even in healthcare for that matter. Why can't we do the same in education? Why can't we turn education on its head when you think about every student is an individual and learns differently? Therefore, why can't we think about applying those tools and say every student should learn differently, and why can't we personalize every student to learn in their own unique way? And I think that's where some of these tools can be really brought to bear. I think Sweden has done some really great work around this in sort of spearheading the way inclusive education needs to be done. I think there's a lot to learn from there as well. But I think that's where the ability for us to look at these tools to get to our students and get to our learners and get to people who need to be skilled and reskills become really important.
Great, thank you, Rahul. I think that that leads me to a question for Kai. Actually, Kai, so Rahul is talking about the importance of digital literacy at the bottom of the pyramid, as well as developing the skills and aptitudes and having a certain amount of agility in that skill development space as well, right? So I would imagine, and forgive me if I'm wrong in my assumption here, but I would imagine that bottom of the pyramid, digital literacy, is pretty well established in a country like Sweden. And if so, how do you think that has impacted the responsible adoption of AI? So, because in some sense, we're making the assumption here that we need to have these skills across the whole pyramid and different kinds of skills, but we need that better understanding for responsible adoption. So, if some of these skills are already in place, has that helped steer more responsible AI trajectories in Sweden?
Not necessarily. I believe, and I might be wrong here, that digital literacy comes quite quick to the individual. I believe there was a small gap when internet was young, when we both learned digital and understood digital, and now we're already in a phase where people just learn to use it, but don't necessarily think about all the implications behind it. I think one reflection that is important is that we talk all over the world about the importance to reskill our workforce constantly throughout our work lives. We need to learn new things. Yet we still shape our schooling system for our children the same way it was 100 years ago. Are you supposed to study 12 years or 15 years and then go out and have one profession for all your life? And we know through 100 years of research that every child's brain develops at different paces, yet they are supposed to learn the same math at the same week in school. Where we have AI today and more basic technology to individualize and tailor tuition to children. So I really think we need to address that as soon as possible so we don't lose an entire generation.
I have one more question from you. I think you made quite a provocative remark at the end of your presentation, right, where you seem to suggest that it's irresponsible not to try to see where we can use AI to produce positive societal outcomes or AI for social good. So are there certain red lines for you or areas where you feel we should proceed with caution, and where we need better public understanding before considering the mass rollout of AI?
I would say the clear red line is, or the cautionary area is when we apply AI without human
So Urvashi, shall I just mute for some time? Or
I guess so. I guess we can just pause.
Okay.
Till we're audible again.
Sure.
We got the audio. Request you to please continue.
Great. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so just continuing that line of thought, I feel that every sector, there's just so much opportunity to make real social difference, not just economic difference, but real social difference. And so what that means to me is, I think the first call to action should be that first, is AI even required? First, let's not apply AI just for the sake of applying AI. Okay, that's that right. Let's solve the problem first. And second, if AI is being used, especially in Indian context, there's just so much potential to augment, so much potential to have human in the loop, and in fact, together really have a more empathetic, more human connected solution. Whether it is education, healthcare, you name it, right? So I think that's the approach I would take. Now, are there clear guidelines where one should think a little bit forward in terms of, what does it mean if this is applied globally without any human intervention, without any, operational checks and balances? Well, you can come up with any use case that can go completely haywire, from a simple chat bot which can learn swear words and go completely nuts, right? I mean, so they're very, very innocuous use cases, can go completely nuts if you don't use them appropriately. So that's to me, the way to think about this is to get to the potential, but with the right checks and balances and the right human intervention and augmentation to really get the maximum value out of it, rather than having very blanket approaches to things.
I think that also really points to this idea of the human in the loop, also really points to the importance of skills, but also the importance of building stronger industry and academia linkages, or building stronger linkages between technologists and social scientists, and creating those spaces where that cross-learning can happen. We have a lot of questions coming in from the audience, so maybe we'll just take a few of them together, and if you and Rahul, if you want to address my earlier question about the red lines as part of that, that might be the best way forward. So one of the, and Rahul, maybe this could be a question to you. An interesting question that's come in from the audience is, how can AI help in the field of mental health? And will it be safe to leave a sensitive topic like mental health under the hands of software?
Urvashi, I presume this question is for me, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I did want to touch upon the red line part, which is, I think Rohini made some very important points, right, of keeping human in the loop. I would argue that human in the loop is necessary but not sufficient. At the end of the day, technology is an amplifier of human intent, right? From the time when we discovered fire, we could use it to protect ourselves from wild animals, cook food, and set fire to the neighboring village, right? So in similar fashion, you can easily conceive of, for example, weaponized AI, right? Automated weapons can easily lead to an arms race, right? Any number of sci-fi movies made on that situation. So that's certainly a domain that has needs that where if not done carefully, you can have a runaway situation, and you need global collaboration to prevent an arms race there. So that's one red line I'd call out. A second set of second set of areas where things should be done carefully is where the use of AI can severely limit personal freedoms, right? And where the state is the primary user, and in fact, like I mentioned earlier, in many ways the state has to protect citizens, right, by ensuring quality of interventions. And when the state itself uses AI, right, who checks the state? And so, for example, predictive policing, things like that. One has to be extremely careful where to have appropriate checks and balances, and it is only possible in situations where there are strong institutions in place to establish those checks and balances. So with that, coming to the question of mental health, I would say firmly in the regime of augmenting. Like any healthcare application, right? Mental health, we know, is a large scale problem, and the mental health challenges, and there is a lack of awareness, lack of diagnosis, lack of skilled personnel. So the question would be, how would you use algorithms to augment limited human capacity that exists today? If we were to look at training enough mental health professionals up to service the needs of India, it's unlikely to happen in one generation, right? So there it's purely an augmentation question with, again, all the checks and balances required of healthcare solutions.
Okay, thanks for that, Rahul, and I appreciate your earlier points as well, and it really drives home, I think, the point to me about having institutional capacity. That without adequate institutional capacities in place, there is a chance that we may not be able to steer technology to align with our societal goals and values. Kai, maybe I can bring you in as well on the mental health question, right? So, what do you think is the role of AI vis-a-vis mental health, particularly when we're talking about children and young children?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a global epidemic, not just with COVID, but with social media right now, which causes a lot of mental health issues. And again, both Facebook and Instagram has functions in place to detect mental health deterioration, but are not allowed to use those algorithms in Europe, for instance, because of our data regulations. So that's an instance where corporations are taking that responsibility, obviously also the cause of it. But I have yet to hear any country talk from a responsibility perspective in schools, for instance. I mean, the same systems could be used in schools to help monitor, or at least have the discussion. How can we use these things with more written communications to help parents and schools monitor health overall? Maybe not monitoring individuals, but at least see what schools, what classes, what teachers are good at helping children.
Thanks for that, Kai. Another question that has come in is about, I'm just going to read it out, which is around how do we use AI and ML to help young people figure out their career paths, right? And can AI be used to address unemployment issues? I mean, if I may take the liberty of maybe rephrasing that question a little bit, right, and adapting it to the Indian context. I mean, we know that the new education policy has recently been released, and AI figures quite centrally in that education policy, both as a tool to deliver education as well as part of the content of the curricula. So, Rohini, maybe I could turn to you for this. I mean, what role do you think that AI can play in education in a country like India, where we see huge gaps in access to quality education? There's certainly a shortage of qualified teachers, the lack of infrastructure, but there are also worries about children's privacy, about what Rahul mentioned in terms of agency and autonomy. So what do you see as the role of AI in education?
Yeah, I think it's actually a sector that that has a lot of potential across the board. I mean, one can go down maybe 2 or 3 different themes in there. There is an element of content, and there is an element of being personalized teaching could be one area, which is of course an area, because not, Kai mentioned, not every child learns the same way. So can you use AI to actually be effective in even getting to outcomes? But that's just one side of it. To me, I think there are actually much bigger problems that can be solved. So one is, for example, just language, right? Accessibility of content to people of different languages, right? And I think that's an area that is just so ripe to have that ability to have content available to people, whether it is across the divide of language barriers or even accessibility of disability, right? So I mean, there's so much that can be done. Now, if you go down the route of operational effectiveness of school systems, the kind of burden just running a class and doing the operational work that teachers are placed on, if can AI help even in aggregate fashion to relieve that, and the teacher can actually spend time on teaching. So I think, to me, there's just, the sector is so replete with opportunities. And the earlier one I talked about, for example, pairing a high skilled educationist with, let's say, somebody in a village who perhaps is not a deep expert. Can you bring that knowledge to somebody and who can display things? You can go crazy with augmented reality and show something even more. I mean, there's just so much you can do, right? So I think but coming to the point of where one has to, this goes to the point of drawing the line. Applying AI as the first use case to do visual, camera in the class to determine if everybody is being attentive is, to me, probably not the top use case. I mean, to me, I think it's one of those examples which I like to give to say, applying AI to a problem because you want to apply AI, quite honestly, right? I feel like, the aspects of privacy, etc. aside, I think it's even, to me, an intrusion of a teacher's ability to engage with students, because now you're being watched. Right? So I think one has to think about the outcome you're trying to drive, whether it is the personalization or this divide between access to the need, and really take from that problem statement perspective to apply AI. And then again, you have to think about the issues we've been discussing all throughout, in terms of privacy, in terms of being able to look at certain data and aggregate, and not be thinking about crossing those boundaries.
Urvashi, I can probably jump in here as well, very quickly.
Please do.
I think there are a couple of things I wanted to add to what Rohini also said here. I think when you think about recommendations that are possible for our learners on platforms today using machine learning, the fact that there is such a big, just the amount of learning content that is out there, any learner can get really confused and get lost in it. And there are platforms available today that can help you sort of work through. They can curate a set of learning material for you and learning paths for you based on your individual learning style. And I think that's the really powerful way to use technology and machine learning for skilling and for learning. Just putting together the set of micro skills that are needed for a specific person based on the way this learner actually learns. I think that becomes a really good way to do this. To take this to the other end, I'll just give you the example of how Alexa was used in a remote village near Thanjavur in Tamil Nadu, just for English learning. It is an application that was developed by Learning Matters. It was called Tara. And it was an augmentation to the teacher. As Rohini was also saying, it didn't replace the teacher, but it really helped the teacher, with the daily task of just teaching English to the students. And I think that's where this technology can really come in useful to be able to sort of help and augment getting consistency for teachers as well. I think one of the bigger issues that India faces is just the consistency of teaching, and how can we actually make teachers more consistent. AI and machine learning can be a phenomenal tool to be able to make that happen and just scale from there. So a couple of, we've seen platforms already that exist today that hugely use recommendation and really target the kids in the right way. And then to be able to make sure that you can target teachers as well, not just students.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think the point of augmenting is really important here, right? And not replacing. And I think we have to find ways that preserve the autonomy and agency of both teachers and children in the education space. Another question we have from the audience, and it's quite a hot topic these days, is whether AI can be used to reduce echo chambers in social media. And I think, part of that question is also around kind of, what can AI be used for content moderation? How does AI, what role does AI have in social media platforms in terms of what is allowed to be said or not said, and how those echo chambers are created? So Kai, would you like to take this question?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's a very hard question, but I think that's probably should be one of the most prioritized questions our politicians and regulators should be discussing. The same way, in many countries, we have comparison prices and other functions that are there to safeguard people or consumers against large forces like marketing and others. I don't think it would be unrealistic to require from the big social media platforms that they are required to also provide information on how biased, how selected or limited the information you are being presented is. The same way media houses are forced to say if something is an ad or not.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Certainly.
I think the audience will really benefit from hearing your views on this.
My views on it.
Yeah.
No, I think I would agree with Kai, right? I think social media platforms have presented themselves as neutral platforms, as merely publishers of information, but I think they do much more than publish information. They curate information and they edit information, and as because of that, they should be held to the same standards of responsibility and accountability as traditional media houses, so the same level of journalistic ethics. I also think, and I think maybe the question is also pointing to that what we see happening on a lot of social media platforms is algorithmic amplification of content that is the most sensational or content that is likely to go viral. So I think we do need to check that algorithmic amplification that is happening on social media platforms, because that is also what is contributing to the creation of these echo chambers. That is what is contributing to the spread of misinformation. I think too often the conversation is framed in terms of free speech, that social media platforms say that they do not want to be regulating free speech. That is not their role. That is the role of governments. But it's not entirely a question of free speech. It's about the amplification of certain kinds of speech and what impact that has. So those are my 2 cents on it. Rahul, would you like to add something to that?
Can I just add one more thing into that? I think traditional journalists play a very important role in elevating and changing what journalism is. They've been under a lot of challenges through internet, but I think if journalists can adopt technology more to safeguard democracy and show that this is actually the truth, I think we can move the bar even higher to regain some of that trust.
Yeah, certainly. I think also now with COVID, we are seeing also, we've seen the decline of traditional media houses for a while. And now with COVID, we're seeing the further decline of those media houses as advertising shifts increasingly to social media platforms. And there's some interesting conversations that are happening globally in Australia, for an example, on the role that these social media platforms should play in supporting traditional media, whether through taxation or other forms of payment. I am conscious of the time, and I think we have covered most of the questions that have come in from the audience. There's one last maybe question that we can end with, which is from the audience, and I'll leave another question with you, which I'd like to come back to, and I'll just give you a few seconds to think about it. So the question from the audience is that the traditional method to teach ethics within Indian culture has been through stories, through folklore. So what role can folklore have in building that public awareness or training? And I think, if we step back from the folklore question, this is really about public engagement, and how do you do public engagement well that speaks to diverse cultural context. So any thoughts on that? And I'll add my own question, piggyback on that, and add a last question, and it'll be great to get a round of responses from everyone. That since this session is about education and public awareness, what is the one myth that you would like to challenge or would like to question in this session? You want to leave the audience with a myth that you think does not hold for AI. So would anyone like to take, the last question is for everyone. Rahul, would you like to start? Any thoughts on the public engagement point, and any myth that you would like to bust to close this session?
Sure. From my perspective, I think I talked about this earlier as well. This is all about creating an environment that is experiential and experimentative. I think that's how Amazon has been successful in the last 20 years, by experimenting and finding. And failure is just the next step to a bigger success. I think when you think about engagement, I'll just come back to all of the points that I was talking about. Be more hyper-local, bring more startups, local startups, engage more. Rahul Panicker talked about co-design, work with the local folks and to be able to create solutions that are specific. And by all means, I think open sourcing a lot of the models, a lot of the work that is happening can really scale up across the country. So I think those engagement models are really necessary to be able to, for me, folklore is about an experience that you had that you bring forward. So let's have quick folklore coming through. What worked in Vidarbha can maybe work in Bihar very, very quickly. And I think that's what the culture that we need to propagate to be able to make the scale very, very quickly. In terms of the one myth that I want to bust, you don't need to be a coder to be able to do machine learning or data science or artificial intelligence. I just want to be able to say that the technologies available today, for example, Amazon SageMaker, you don't need to know any coding to be able to use machine learning. So go dabble your hands, experience the technology. It's all self-service. The tools are available at your disposal. Go just get started. And that's the only one myth that I want to bust today.
Great, thank you. Rohini, maybe we can bring you in next.
Yeah, sure. I think I love the idea of the person who has posed the question about folklore and how we learn with stories, because that's just so true. Stories are the way we think about facts and how values and principles and ideas stick in your mind. So I think in some ways it's a very powerful comment and actually generating ideas in my head. But even when we think about some of the principles I was speaking about, right? And even when we discuss, when I say we, meaning with Microsoft, when we discuss use cases, I think in many times for us, the ability to make that responsible AI principle comes alive in the context of a specific scenario with very specific actors and the context of it, which is the story around it that makes it really relevant to say, why should you care, right? And why should you worry about a small kid in a small town who has either access or not access to a particular privilege. So I think that is a very important one, and in some ways to Rahul's point about can we turn it around, because again, this is still early in AI, and still, some of these stories you hear about, a teacher being able to leverage AI to be able to bring content to her students, or a healthcare worker be able to work on diagnosing early traces of lung cancer, for example. All of those become stories to be able to then say, okay, this is really worth latching on to become at scale, because it's you step out. It's not like you're seeing AI everywhere, but the stories are there, and that's what you need to really adopt. I think, but it's a powerful thought, and thanks for that. So I think from a perspective of myth, I think the one of the things which we touched about is, often you think about AI as a technology, and to me, in many ways, it's actually very little about technology. And we've been discussing that a lot in this conversation, right? It's so much about the ethics of it, the culture of it, the thinking of in a corporate setting, of course, the strategy of it. And then when we say, for example, we're discussing about augmenting, that doesn't happen overnight. It's also a culture of being able to leverage with the technology to be able to augment what you are doing and be able to trust what data is doing. So there's a huge shift that is not actually about technology at all. So that's the myth I'd like to bust, that this is much bigger than technology. And I'm coming from a tech company, so.
Great, thanks for that. I think that's a really powerful and important point. So I appreciate you raising that. Kai, your concluding remarks around these 2 points.
So my concluding remarks would be, first of all, do not fall for the messages of polarization that might come from those who want to sell newspapers or win votes, because polarization is not the solution. AI is not a threat. It is probably 100 times or 1,000 times bigger an opportunity for most people. And the interesting thing is that it's those with least that has the most to gain from AI, in comparison to the Industrial Revolution, where blue-collar jobs were mostly replaced. It is those in power that has the most to lose this times around, because those are the ones that can be augmented the most. So people would not need as much education to do the same jobs. So I think my urge would be for everyone and anyone to understand what is possible with AI. As you said now, you don't need to learn to code AI, it's just a faster calculator, but you need to understand how it's going to affect the world so you can vote the right way and have the right discussions and be open to it.
Great, thank you. Rahul?
How much time do we have, Urvashi?
We're almost out of time.
We're almost out of time. Okay, then I'll save it because I love stories. Yeah, I mean, I think stories. This is one
quick story.
Sorry.
We can do a quick story.
Do a quick story. Then I'll share the story in the end. I'll start with the myth, which is what level of capability that AI has today and where it needs to go, which is we've seen many examples where AI has achieved human capability or superhuman capability. But pretty much all the mature AI technologies today don't have the capability to tell if lightning causes thunder or thunder causes lightning. It does not have common sense understanding of the world. It does not have any ability to do any causal reasoning, right? And that is how we as humans understand the world. And the world inherently is causal, right? So as an AI researcher, I'll say that that's actually a frontier area of work. And so as something as simple as that, if AI is unable to do, place limited trust in AI right now. And maybe the story I want to leave the audience with is something that Amartya Sen shared. As you think of ideas of justice, right, and especially as we think of notions of fairness, right, and do we share notions of fairness? There's a famous story of a father having 3 children, right, and where the oldest child made a flute. The second child knows how to play beautiful music on the flute. And the third child has no other toys to play with. Right? And if you are the father and you could decide who to give the flute to, who do you give it to? Right? And in fact, I'd say if you're an audience member, think of who you might actually, as a parent, give it to. And you'll see actually different people give different answers. But these are reflective of very different value systems. To some people, what is most striking in this situation is how obvious the answer is to some people. Oh, obviously it should go to the first child. To other people, it's obviously the third child because the third child has no other toys to play with. But there are entire societies that differ on what the right answer here is, right? Libertarian free market capitalist societies, right to property, and so it obviously belongs to the first child. For societies that maximize that are more that basically maximize social utility, of course, it's the second child that brings maximizes some total happiness. And of course, for societies that value egalitarianism and want to bring up the bottom, it is obviously the third child. So questions of fairness and ethics are not absolute, and there are entire countries that differ on this. And this is the importance of, and this is a story that stayed with me for more than 10 years. And so it's the importance of actually having education and in ethics.
That's such a powerful story, Rahul. Thanks for sharing that. I think I mean, when I see a lot of the tech policy conversations, sometimes in India and even globally, they're very, very polarized. And I often feel that it's not a question of more or better evidence that can resolve these tech policy conversations, because what we really have is differences in values and differences in ideologies. And that's what's driving these differences. So we don't necessarily need more evidence always to be able to make value judgments that, or, make certain decisions about what is beneficial for society. I want to thank you all very, very much. I thought it was a really thoughtful and invigorating discussion, and we covered a huge range of issues. I'm really part of a panel that lasts 2 hours, but the time went by very quickly. So thank you all very much. I learned a lot. I'm going to do an awful job summarizing the conversation because there was so much content that we covered. But very quickly, I think some of the big takeaways for me, and in no particular order, but just in how I'm remembering them, is the importance of norms, is the importance of humans, and that an AI augmenting humans, not replacing humans, is the importance of thinking of AI not just as a technology, but as a social system, and thinking about the values and priorities that are driving it. I think the importance of thinking about skills and education, the importance about thinking about regulatory structures and institutions, and the importance of trying to align technology trajectories with institutional capacities and societal goals. So thank you very much. And I'd like to give the mic back to Dr. Mishra to conclude this session.
Thank you, Urvashi, for an excellent summary. And as we come to the close of this session, on behalf of Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, I thank all the speakers and our moderator for taking center stage to make this session a great success. The ideas, thoughts, and the discussion shared in this session have been very enlightening and thought-provoking, and I'm sure would be very useful in the policy making that we work on further in the times to come. We look forward to have many more such sessions in future as well. So thank you very much, Rahul, Sharma, Rahul, Panicker, Urvashi, Dr. Rohini, Kai. I thank all the participants of this session, and I'm told there are almost nearly 3,000 participants who have been connected across the country and outside too, for making this session meaningful with your questions and your other suggestions that you made, and making it very interactive, despite the limitations of this virtual mode that we are now doing in these very testing times. So stay safe, and I wish you all a good evening, afternoon, or night, whatever it is. Thank you, and namaskar to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.